As you're starting your parody painting, there are a couple of tips and tricks that might help you to sort of capture the artist's style that you chose. So, the first thing that we talked about last week during our Google Meet was to really try to capture the correct colors. So, the paint colors that come directly from the bottle generally are not going to be the correct colors on your painting. They're just going to be a little bit too vibrant. I would encourage you to use the lid. So my palette's different than yours, but I would use the lid that you have with your paint container to do a lot of your mixing, just so you don't contaminate your colors. You can just take blobs of color and mix them on the lid. So that way your blob of white and your blob of yellow and your blob of red stay nice for other parts of the painting. Does that make sense? So try to mix somewhere separate from where you store your paint. It also is really handy to have a picture available of the painting you're mimicking. So that way you can really test out colors. Now, if that painting is on your Chromebook, you obviously can't paint on your Chromebook. Don't paint on your Chromebook to test if the colors match. I have a printout so I can kind of test and see if the colors work or not, but you'll just have to use your observation skills to see if the color is correct. So I'm sort of testing here. I'm really doing a lot of problem solving and a lot of kind of going back and forth to see if I can find the right color. It really does take a lot of trial and error. You'll notice that it was a little too green, so I mixed some red in it. When you mix the opposite of a color on the color wheel, it mutes it. Another thing you want to pay attention to is the textures in the painting that you're mimicking. So you'll see here in Vincent van Gogh's pieces, his paint is really thick. You can see like really sort of globby textures, and I want to try to match that. Now, I can tell that his background isn't just a smooth, even coat of one color. There are a little bit like lighter values, a little bit darker values. So I'm going to mix a couple of different types of this sort of mint green for the background. And now I'm going to try to mimic some of the textures on the painting he started. So I can see that it almost looks like a checkerboard, the way he painted it. His brush strokes looks like they were in a checkerboard. So I'm going to take those light greens and the slightly darker greens, mint green, and I'm going to see if I can get that sort of checkerboard texture, right? So sometimes his brush is going up and down, sometimes it's going right to left. I'm going to see if I can mimic that. Now, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to be able to make this perfectly, but you are going to be able to make it look pretty close. And that's the goal. You want it to look pretty close. So the nice thing about adding texture right now is I already have an underpainting. So there's not a bunch of white from the background showing through, because I started by doing an underpainting, a really thin painting of the correct colors. And that's actually going to help me a lot in the long run. If it doesn't look right away, that probably means you need more layers. I would be very surprised if you could get away with just 1 or 2 layers on this painting. I'm going to guess you're going to need about 3 or 4 before you get the right textures and colors that you like. I'm going to keep going through here until I feel like some of this is matching a little bit better. It's actually looking fairly close, so I might move on to the next part to see if I can really make it look as similar as possible. I'm going to mix this sort of dark brown that sort of outlines the edge of this vase. If you don't have brown, you can make brown by combining all the primary colors, mostly yellow and red, with a tiny touch of blue. And that should make a brown for you. I would skip the white unless you're making a tan. So I'm going to take and see if I can get this sort of outline between the background and the table. Mine is a little bit dark. Maybe try to lighten it up a little bit here. And then I'm going to do the line that separates the vase from the background. Now, these are a little bit dark, but I can always go over this later. Once this acrylic paint dries, it actually is very easy to paint over and over and over again. So if you make a mistake, don't freak out too much. All right, I'm going to draw in this sort of detail here where the vase sort of has a line coming across the front, sort of by his signature there. And then I'm going to try to mix up a color that matches the top part of this vase, because I want to try to mimic some of those textures as well while I'm doing this video. So it's kind of a yellow vase that matches the table. I'm going to start with sort of a base layer here. And then I'm going to mix up colors that go with it. So I'm going to mix up a slightly lighter color and see if I can get those sort of thick brush strokes to add in the texture that Vincent van Gogh uses. Okay, so you probably sort of get the picture at this point. It's a lot of trial and error, back and forth, using your observation skills. Here's another quick example. This piece is called The Scream, and a student actually did this and left it here a couple years ago, so I'm going to paint on it. Might be rude. But the sky here isn't quite accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to add in more colors to make the sky on the parody painting sort of match the original a little bit better. So she missed a lot of these lighter values, so these gold and yellow values. I'm using water to help me blend in some of the colors here. I know this is going pretty quick. If you use water, it makes your paint a little more see-through or transparent, and you can sort of blend on top of your base layer, which is nice. And don't forget the weird colors. I know that green is weird, but it's actually in the painting. Okay, I know that was quick, but I just wanted to show you a second layer and how that can really help. A couple pointers that I think might be helpful. Let's say you have a painting that needs to have a really nice fade, so it has like a sunset, for example. If you're trying to get a good gradient with acrylic paint, you have to work kind of quickly because it dries fast, and you're probably going to need to use water to blend it. Now I'm going to do a gradient between red and yellow, and you'll notice I mixed 3 colors. I mixed the orange, and then I have the red and the yellow on the side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a brush with a little bit of water and sort of blend those colors together. This will only work if your painting is not dry yet. So if your paint has already started to dry, this isn't going to work very well. If that's the case, just mix up those colors again and do a second coat and try to blend them before they dry. Okay, so water can be used to blend paint. If you use too much water, it'll be too see-through. This is why we work in layers. Okay. A lot of you will have artists who use a lot thicker paint and might not have those perfectly smooth blends. So if that's the case for you, you can mix up the colors that you want and sort of lay those thick brush strokes of color down, and then use your brush to add in some more texture. Okay, so don't be afraid to add in texture. You could always do the gradient first as a base layer, and then add the texture on top of it to sort of mimic the artist you chose. If you chose Andy Warhol, you might actually skip some of the texture. I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going through with a clean brush, and I'm going to add in some textures and brush strokes, just so you can see how you can blend the colors when they're wet and get some really nice texture in there. So if you're choosing an artist that has really crisp areas, you might have to let layers dry in between to get those nice hard edges. But I'll show you an example here. So I'm going to start with just a circle of this yellow color here. And I'm going to assume that this artist doesn't have a lot of texture or color variation in their paint right now. So I'll try to get a really even coat of paint, much like our first painting, and get a really crisp edge. So you can get crisp edges when the paint is wet. It's just a little bit harder to do. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to get some blue paint here. And I'm going to really carefully brush that paint along the edge of my yellow circle and try to keep the edge crisp and neat. It actually worked pretty well. So if you have Andy Warhol, you're going to be doing stuff like this, really even coats of paint. Now let's say you have an artist and you're having a really hard time adding texture. Just keep testing things out. So if I had Vincent van Gogh, for example, like a Starry Night type painting, and you start adding those dash marks, it might be the case that you need to do layers of color and repeat those colors. So I did this lighter blue and then a darker blue, and I might need to go in with that original blue and sort of emphasize that color again. Okay. For this painting, honestly, just do the best that you can. I do want you to try though. I can definitely tell if someone tried or didn't try. So do the best you can. Try to mimic the colors, try to mimic the textures, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and just really use your observation skills. You can definitely do this.